Hope everybody can hear me now. Okay, good. Hello, I'm Apoorva Sharma. What I do, I'm right now is I'm a senior engineering manager at JP Morgan Chase in Hyderabad here. One reason I wanted to come and do this talk was because I recently moved to Hyderabad. I've been doing the lean and the CI/CD for a while, but I I moved from the States and I lost all my network. So I'm just trying to get plugged back in. Uh, what I've done professionally, it's quite, so I worked at a publishing company. I worked with some of you might know VMware. Then I worked at a backup and disaster recovery company where we were doing largely backing up Office 365 and G Suite. Uh, and then now I work at JPM. Um, One disclaimer, my day job and what I do at JPM has got nothing to do with the talk. A lot of this is based on everything that I've done in the past. Um, and so, I'm sort of repurposing that just to give you a bird's eye view of what I have done till now or what GitOps is. Um, I did, I was lucky enough that when the lean movement was starting up, the Agile Manifesto and all these things were cropping up. I happened to be there seeing this. So I've seen the evolution from waterfall to now, whatever you call extreme and all of that. Uh, that movement, I believe, is what, or that change was what brought about such a lot of automation, and GitOps is sort of just taking it to another extreme. So, that's that. Um, oh yeah, it's going to be largely, I don't have a demo. I would love, if you have questions, please feel free to stop me. I do have to wrap this up in time so that I don't get into trouble with Atul. So if there's a question that I can't, that I'm running short of time on, we'll just skip and we'll get back to you. Those of you who I got once Mukesh announced the event, a lot of you reached out on LinkedIn to stay connected. If I have not accepted your request, that is because I'm old school. I believe 5 minutes of a conversation in person is much better. But regardless, I will accept it. But if you're here, please come find me. I'm more interested in meeting you than you would think. Okay, just to get a read on what the room is like, how many of you here are just starting on GitOps or are working with a tool already with GitOps? Something related to it, doesn't matter. Okay. And then how many engineers, how software engineers are early career engineers versus like mid or late career engineers? Like 5 to 7, 10 to 12 okay, that's 5 to 7? Okay. And last bit, how many people in engineering leadership roles, like software engineering managers, directors, VPs? Okay. And then the rest of the room is all software engineers, right? Okay, great. Okay, so it's largely a 20,000 feet overview. We'll just quickly go through it. Please feel free to stop me, as I said again. Okay, so how do I say this? Once the basic of GitOps is that you define your code, your infrastructure, and your application configuration in a declarative manner. And then you let the tools and the other technologies sort of just take care of automating it. And that's what is meant by that first thing, saying it's a way to automate declarative infrastructure and application deployment. Of course, Git being the source of truth, like everything is maintained in Git, written out in Git, in YAMLs or whatever format, and then it goes from there. Sorry, yeah. Okay, hold on. This does another thing. back to where it was? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so all the automation that goes into deploying the application, the application configuration, your infrastructure, which is going to run the application, all of that is maintained in Git, and therefore the only way to do changes in Git is a Git push. That's why, now if you have software engineers, you've realized you already know how many times have you pushed a bug into production, and all of that is actually facilitated by a Git push. Hence the talk title saying, Git push does more than just, it should deploy something more than just regret. Now, the intent of all of this was to be able, all of this came around because there was a need to facilitate closer interactions between the engineering teams, the software engineers, developers, the infrastructure folks, and then, of course, the DevOps or the SREs who you're closely interacting with. Typically, those two roles, which is infrastructure management and SRE DevOps, tend to be separated out in larger organizations. Okay, there is one more. That's there on the last point, which is it is not just configurations. Some teams have now started to take it to another level where your Grafana dashboards, which is your observability, your monitoring, which is setting up the alerts. All of that also can be declaratively defined and kept into Git. And then there are GitOps tools which will help you sort of just stand up from those YAMLs, your dashboards and reporting and everything. Okay, so as I said, so this part is, I'm a little bit of a history buff, and so I did want to share a lot of this history around how GitOps started to come around. WeWorks, which was formed by this guy called Alexis Richardson, and he came out of, if you see his talks, he came out of this company called Pivotal and VMware. They were housed inside of VMware, and they were running a lot of these tools at the time. And so 2016, I attended another, it was 2016, 2015, I attended another talk where Bose Corporation, they were doing a lot of what today GitOps is. And this is right around the time the CRDs had just started to come out in Kubernetes. So they were doing some of this, and there were other teams and places. You will see if you go online, there is, I think Chick-fil-A was sort of trying to do something, which is, Chick-fil-A is like is another KFC in the States. And they were also trying to do something which was sort of like GitOps, but it wasn't, really, the term hadn't come around. So Richardson sets up this company, and then he's like, talking with people, they came out, they evaluate Kubernetes and other cloud native tools to understand, okay, how do we make that integration between the devs, the infrastructure folks, and the SREs more sort of coherent, and so that there are no handoffs. So he sets up WeWorks. The idea of GitOps comes around that time. I think it was 2017 KubeCon was when this term comes around. And right about that time, in the Valley, there is another group, which is a couple of these guys. Who are very tormented and not unhappy with the way they are doing deployments. I think Pratik Vidar, and there were other guys. And they are setting up, another way to do this. They come up with something called Argo, and Argo, they're trying to sell that as it's a small startup. They're starting, they want to get more adoption. They're not getting customers. And then the CRDs come around and they open source the core engine, which is around batch processing, that is there in Argo. Now, these are the two sides that are happening around 2017, 2018, which is what you're seeing now. WeWorks, and that time is when around 2018 that KubeCon happens and they all get together. The GitOps terms comes around. Argo has gotten a lot of funding and traction at that time. So Argo CD is then, eventually gets taken up by Intuit. They come up with that workflow engine, etc. So 2018, 2019 is where you're starting to see Flux come around. Flux came out of WeWorks. And then there is Argo, which is starting to gather momentum. Those are the two things that are happening. 2020 is when they will go up and join CNCF. CNCF had been formed around that time. That thing that happened in 2020, which is the GitOps working group, where they started to put together what is going to be, how teams are going to interact, how tools are going to interact. That thing is now gone. It's now called Open GitOps. So that's how fast technology sort of moves. So that happens, and then 2021, the adoption is picking up. Now, I alluded to this earlier, Bose and Chick-fil-A, and there is Target also who was doing this, something similar. Until now, until 2020, most of the GitOps work is focused around microservices. There are people in patches here and there who are trying to use it for fleet management, which is, I have point of sale machines out, for example, in Target, and they are actually running small instances of Kubernetes on their point of sale machines. So, or you have, Chick-fil-A also in their own stores, their point of sales machine, they're pushing out their applications over and running them inside K3S. I think that's K3S is what they're running. Again, all that fleet management is happening using GitOps principles, basically. So we'll touch over these. There was, if you folks have heard around, there is a telecom provider in Europe called Orange. And Orange did their 5G rollout using, this tech stack, Argo, Flux, Git, etc. So I think, yeah. And so that's where 2020-23 is all where now you are starting to see even AI get into the mix, of course. Everything in 2024-25 is about AI. Okay, so yeah, so I touched upon this, right, already. The need for GitOps is coming out of cloud native app management, which is microservices you've deployed in production or you want to deploy, and then how do you get them there? Or if you have deployed services, then how do you roll out upgrades, patch management, canary deployments, all of that. So those are the things where GitOps is coming around. The infrastructure management, I'm going to come back to this in a bit. But that's what pre-GitOps the world looks like. You have your software developers and software engineers who are writing their code. They have some application configurations written up alongside in the same repository. They check in their code, they are done. And then they hand off everything that they have to the operations team, if you call it them that, right? Your DevOps folks. This other team is actually now responsible for figuring out how that application is going to be configured. How much do you want to scale it out? How much, how are you going to load balance it and all that? Those details are completely, are not available, or the devs aren't even interested in it. When something goes wrong, that's when the devs are called in or the engineers are called in and it's like, okay, what's going on, right? That's the world we are operating in at that time. How are we doing on time? Okay. So one other thing that will quickly happen with this is if there are two separate teams, and not really talking to each other, not seeing what the other one is doing. What would often happen is the live environment where the infrastructure and the config settings and everything starts to deviate from and is disconnected from the way when you're developing the application. Those are two separate environments. Drift starts to appear, which causes a whole other headache. If you're using Terraform and all of that, you will probably know that. Yeah. Okay. Pre-GitOps, or even now for that matter, if you're using Ansible or you're using Terraform and you run, what you'll do is you'll set up these servers, you'll run patches and you'll install software, and then I need to patch this machine, and you will go run your playbook if you're using Ansible, or you run Terraform in your workspace and you'll fix that machine. And invariably, one machine in your fleet is different from the other. So those are the things where GitOps actually helps minimize, if not completely eliminate. Okay. Okay, so that's what a GitOps pipeline will actually look like. So the developer or the software engineer is going to commit the code into the application repository. That application is going to get built, maybe packaged as a container, or if you're running Helm, then the Helm chart is going to get created, pushed into a registry. Of course, I hope you're still testing, because I don't see GitOps is something which is an extension. It allows you to do continuous delivery. Now, continuous delivery means getting it from your sandbox to production in the shortest possible amount of time, without tests being automated, whether it is unit, integration, end-to-end, scalability. Please don't do GitOps. Please don't. I hope that assumption is there, that yes, you have to test, and test. So it gets pushed up into the registries. Now, there is this new thing which I will touch upon, which is called an operator, which is running behind the scenes inside your K8s cluster or your Kubernetes cluster. That operator is doing the job of looking up changes that happen to the repository, and thereafter sort of doing a kubectl apply, or rolling that, whether it's a config map or a secret, whatever, it just pushes it out into your namespace or in a K8s cluster. The other side of it is, this is where GitOps happens really. That same Git repository where the application code is residing is also where the configs, for the application and for your infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean if you're running Kubernetes, then there is probably got to be a VM running. You are setting up Kubernetes there. That's infrastructure. That's also in the same repository. The devs, at that point, the devs as well as the infrastructure guys can see each other's code and see what is happening. More communication there. Okay. Yeah. So these are a few good. So infrastructure management, right? Bose is doing 2016. If anybody here has Bose speakers at home? Okay. Yeah. So if you've got the good Bose speakers, like the soundbar and everything, it's actually running software. If you see how they have preset settings in there, which says if you want to listen to a movie, you have these settings. Essentially, what they're doing is they're playing with the bass, the treble, and the equalizers. That is all pre-configured software. Every now and then, you will see your Bose speaker actually connects to the internet and does something behind the scenes. And at that point, it is actually connecting all the way up to the Bose servers. It's running a K3s there, downloading the application and making all the changes. So They were doing that in 2016. The CRDs really helped them there. And I've talked about Chick-fil-A, which is a set of restaurants. They are doing edge. They're using really GitOps to manage their edge servers. Of course, there is the 5G deployment that I talked about, which is Orange. They have done that. These are all case studies and talks on CNCF. So you're happy to go, take a look at those. They are good reads, actually. So we've done that. Why? Sorry. Okay. So we'll quickly touch upon what he was referring to. Yeah. Sorry. I'll try. Need the full screen. This is full screen. Okay.
So maybe when you're talking, you can.
Yeah. Let's see if it is any better. Yeah. Thank you, Patul. Okay. Hopefully that is better. So DevOps, GitOps, I think, that segregated approach is that separate siloed approach is what is really DevOps, where versus GitOps is a more integrated approach for software engineering teams to work. So I say one is a push approach, the other one is a pull-based approach. The pull-based approach in GitOps comes from this thing which is called operators. And then there is that tendency which I was talking about in DevOps, where they are typically separated application and deployment pipelines. So they're running in two different systems, and that's what causes that disjointedness, and drifts start to appear. Those, typically the last two, especially the last two, which is desired state management, the CMD, those things are resolved or dealt better with GitOps. So you don't need CMDBs if you're running Terraform or you're running Ansible. Typically, I don't know if people here do this, you will have another tool. There are things like Netbox. Anybody here in infrastructure management? Okay. So Netbox is a tool where if you have a huge fleet of servers, it says, here is a machine in this data center, it's got these IP addresses, it's sitting on this subnet. And then Ansible goes and reads Netbox and then says what changes it needs to apply and pushes those out. So you'll need, that's called configuration management databases, a CMDB. And the need for that really goes down with, if you do GitOps, because all of that is now stored centrally in the same Git repository.
I have a question on this one.
Please.
So basically the life is going very smooth in terms of Jenkins when we make some sort of code when we push the code to the GitHub, then the webhooks is going to trigger, then it will trigger the pipelines, right? And in terms of IOC, we will use our Terraforms and it maintains the states. So why we need to again go back to this concept of? Shall I repeat the question or?
It's his call. I think if the room heard it, I think we should probably.
This is just like, I have some basic questions on this. We already have DevOps. Life is going very smooth. Like when I push the code, my webhooks will trigger and it is going to run pipeline and deploy it wherever it is required, right? And then it goes with the CI/CD topic. And now when we talk about the state management, right? So instead of, I already use like Terraform kind of things where I can manage my state. in S3 or wherever it may be, right? So I can know the state of my deployments, and whatever the changes I do, the delta will be deployed. Okay. So now, again, why I had to go use this kind of concepts called as GitOps when I have these tools in place and people know the knowledge of those tools, and we are very familiar with that one.
Yeah. So if I
sorry, last question.
Yeah, please. Sorry.
So we have DevOps, GitOps, IOC, and how they can complement each other in the session what you are
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, I saw somebody in the engineering leadership role. You probably Okay. The quick answer to it is if you do Netbox or S3, you're still incurring another cost. What is the most relevant to you, right? With GitOps, you end up saving that money. You don't need another tool.
But still, see, cost matters. No cost matters sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But when I go with the premium clients, cost does not matter.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas consistency, and we should also think about scalability,
mm-hmm.
and we should also think about repetition, right? So I get something, out of box which is coming as a free, and use it, right? So those things, of course, definitely we need open source tools, but for a premium clients, open source tools, which comes with its own baggage, and it is going to be a risk of repetition also.
Mm-hmm. So it's a more okay. I'll try and answer this quickly. There are a few gaps there, or I won't call it gaps. There are a few struggles there, and it's sometimes the need to change from the existing status quo and to go to something new like GitOps. There might be so much inertia in the system, and the cost is you may not choose it, and I think that if that is the case, then that's fine. But here are a few things that happen with DevOps. Typically, when you apply in a DevOps-centric model, the engineers are separate from the DevOps SRE folks. The DevOps SRE folks are primarily they're sitting on some same Scrum team, but your engineers typically don't know enough of Ansible or Terraform that they can go debug a live production issue when that happens. You have to have specialized skill there. A specialized skill recruitment and putting that is an extra cost. It's also a risk that you encounter. Now, then there are problems with Ansible. If you're running large fleets, like you're running 5,000, 6,000 servers out in the open, like with Chick-fil-A, you have to maintain that state and you have to get Netbox. And at that point, there's another tool in your tech stack. Versus with GitOps, what you can do is all that information is maintained in your own one Git repository. The same developer can go make the Ansible change. It just needs to be reviewed by somebody. And there is no risk. That developer doesn't need to know the guts of Terraform.
The point came in here before GitOps has also. Mm-hmm. We have the same structure.
Yeah.
We maintain our configurable elements inside our Git repo,
mm-hmm.
and that's definitely the configuration management is there. And we have the webhooks. Webhooks are there with the help of we can trigger, and we can review the code review and all that is not part of GitHub cycle. I guess.
No, it is.
Suppose I meant to say, basically when we go with the GitOps, the popular tool what we call Argo CD or Flex is the one which will be coming to the play where it picks up it will identify the change inside the repo and pull the code and deploy it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I see it's a GitOps. But I'm just trying to understand how they can complement with each other with the infrastructure as a code and the current DevOps practice.
Yeah, so
can you just take this up? Because I mean the next stop is also addressing this.
I'm sorry.
So maybe we'll address there.
Okay. This should sort of answer that, but whose battery is low? Okay, not mine. So ISC is the minimum required, or sorry, okay. Infrastructure as code is a necessity before you can do GitOps. So that's the next progression to it, if you will. Now, okay, one thing with GitOps, right? And I say this jokingly. So it's GitOps. Everything is in Git, right? And so you'll put your secrets also in Git. Yeah? Yes? No? Maybe? Not in plain text? Okay. Thank God. Yeah. Especially the place I am in, compliance, this is like, even my build pipeline does not succeed if I start doing this. So there are a few good tools there. Bitnami's got some, so okay, forget the tools. There are two approaches. One is encrypted secrets, where you take a secret, you sort of run it through some encryption, and then you put that encrypted secret in your Git repository. And then the other one is, which is secret referencing, where the secret is actually stored somewhere. And in your config YAMLs or your Helm charts, you're basically putting a placeholder for that secret. So at deploy time, that secret gets overridden, it's pushed out as an environment variable. So that's another approach. I'll prefer the latter, just because with encrypted secrets, there are a few challenges. Depending on what environment you are in, it's easy to trace the identity of the committer. In some environments, that's a problem. Or you can think about it as somebody knows that this person has or wrote up the secret, then the hacker can go and target that person. There are a few other issues. If your secrets ever become compromised with that encrypted secrets, it's a challenge now to roll it out across your fleet. So when I say fleet, you think about 6,000 servers out in the wild. That's easier with the GitOps, where you change it in one place, it just goes out across the entire fleet. Okay, so I want to touch upon quickly a few basic setting up, or for anybody looking to transition into this way of working. There are a few, for lack of a better word, a few architectural or high-level things that you should sort of consider. One is a version control system. You have to decide if you're going to do GitLab, you're going to do GitHub Actions, let me say just GitHub, not GitHub Actions, because those are two separate things. Or you do whatever version control system you're going to pick. How you're going to set up your Git repositories. Now there are various reasons and it is important to make those choices about how you set up your Git repositories very deliberately. Typically if you're a small team, 5 people, 7 people maybe, you can do one repository and put all your application, your configs, and your infrastructure in one repository and call it done. That you'd be fine. If you are large teams, that's where it becomes a little more challenging. For example, are you going to structure your Git repositories around environments? So will you have one GitOps repo for your dev, one for staging, and one for prod? Or are you going to do one per environment? So here is my cluster, etc. So yeah, or one per region, for another. Your registries, operators, what operators are going to use? There are a couple of approaches around operators, pull and push based. So you got to pick that, your runtimes and then namespaces. Are you going to have one namespace per developer, or do you want to have a namespace per environment? So stage, prod, dev, right? The operator bit, I'd say, to me, if you don't have an operator, you are not doing GitOps. So, that's the other thing. Okay, I'll quickly touch upon, because I feel there is a lot of, this is the most critical part. If for application configuration and infrastructure management, there is a bunch of tasks that you have to repeatedly do, which have absolutely no long-term value. Patching, there's no value to it, to the customer. So the operators will encapsulate, or essentially their task is, they will use the Kubernetes API, encapsulate the logic that comes with the tool, and automate that task for you, really. So there is the operation, so the middle part that you see, that's the operational knowledge of, say, a Terraform operator or a Flux operator. And the operator does three things basically. One, it's going to keep monitoring the state, the current state of the fleet and the desired state, which is in your repositories. And when it sees a drift, it will either alert you or it will do the job of, rolling back that change which it sees in the fleet. Yeah, this is, I think, the part that most people might be interested in. Why? Okay, yeah. So we've touched upon the single source of truth already. There is increased collaboration. I have been part of teams where we have done DevOps, and then we have done we rolled out, we were operating in the GitOps model. So one of the benefits that I really saw was, if I as an engineer pushed a change, all that I needed was a green light from my ops or my infrastructure folks to say, okay, yeah, this is a safe change to push out. I did not need to know the guts of Terraform, because the moment, and every time I tried to do something from Terraform directly, for some reason or somebody else, the Terraform workspace gets corrupted. And those are the kind of things that where the dev doesn't need to understand the internals of the infrastructure tools, and they still can work and push those changes out. So that PR review, MR review is happening across teams. That's one thing. Continuous security and auditing. The Git logs will show when the change was pushed out. There is this thing which is called the attack surface in security parlance, if you've heard about it. Because the number of tools have now been reduced, and the exposure is lesser, so your attack surface is lesser. And then you can have, of course, the credential management comes in with using these pull-based operators also. Access management becomes easier because you have, there are tools now out there which do OPA, which is Open Policy Agents, Coverno, and which will do the job of enforcing policy. So who should have rights to do what in your fleet? That also, there are operators like that also. So, and that becomes a continuous security. You don't, the moment there is a deviation, the operator will go and enforce that or push that compliance back in. Of course, with all of this, goes without saying, your deploy times are quicker, you can push out faster, but also your rollbacks are faster. As you go select these operators, that is one thing to consider. That see if you want to pull or take operators who have already implemented canary deployments, blue-green deployments, because those things are a pain to implement yourself. So some things that should go in there. I think that's all that I wanted to share. And I'll just leave you with one thought with this one guy called Kelsey Hightower, for those who have heard about Kubernetes a lot. This guy once said something that I was attending on a KubeCon, and which resonated with me. He said, please share. And he says, this idea that you have to be an expert before you start sharing your thoughts or your opinions is a tool that gatekeepers use to discourage people from looking behind curtains. So if you have any feedback for me that I did not do right, or I could have more talked about, please share. I am happy to listen to it. happy to hear about it. I'm here for my own well-being and for my own interest to make more friends in the community. So I'll look forward to catching up with you folks later. That's pretty much it.